Kashif on Video Soul.
All right.
Man, imagine this. You're vibing to the radio, hearing jams like Love Come Down by Evelyn Champagne King or Whitney Houston's You Give Good Love, and you don't even realize the genius behind it all. That genius was Kashif. He was the quiet architect, the man in the studio laying down hits that defined the sound of 1,980 and 1,990 R&B, and yet, outside the liner notes, his name barely rang out. That's crazy, right? A foster kid who survived the roughest childhood, who turned pain into melodies, who gave the world music that still spins today. But the world didn't give him the flowers he deserved. Kashif should have been mentioned in the same breath as Prince or Babyface. So why did his story end in mystery and silence? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea. Sit back, and let's start this journey together. Kashif Salim was born Michael Jones in New York City in December 1956. From the very start, life didn't deal him a fair hand. He never really knew the warmth of a stable family, never had that picture-perfect childhood people like to talk about. Instead, Kashif grew up in the foster care system, and man, it was rough. We're talking about moving from house to house, being treated less like a child and more like a burden. Some of those homes were filled with neglect, others with outright abuse. Imagine being just a kid and already carrying scars most adults couldn't handle. That was Kashif's reality. But here's the wild part. He didn't let that pain turn him bitter. He didn't become the monster that the world tried to make him. If anything, it fueled him. You know how some kids grab onto sports or books to escape? For Kashif, it was music. He found little ways to drown out the noise, to escape the chaos around him. Sometimes that meant humming melodies to himself, sometimes just closing his eyes and dreaming of a place where the beat was steady and the rhythm was kind. Man, no child should have had to go through what Kashif did. But somehow, deep inside, he carried a resilience that nobody could take away. The streets could be cold, the houses could be cruel, but that spark that need to create, to express, was alive. And that spark was about to become his lifeline. By the time most kids were still trying to figure out who they were, Kashif had already built a mental fortress. Every disappointment, every cruel word, every night he felt invisible, it all stacked up into fuel. He wasn't just surviving, he was preparing for a moment when he could take all that pain and flip it into something the world couldn't ignore. That's the foundation of Kashif's story, a kid with nothing, shaping himself into a man who would one day give everything through music. In the middle of all that chaos, music became more than just a distraction for Kashif. It became survival. Somewhere between the cold walls of foster homes and the long nights of wondering why life had to be this way, he found instruments. First it was the flute in grade school, then keyboards, then any sound he could get his hands on. Man, when you don't have people telling you you're special, sometimes the only thing that talks back is the music itself. And that's what happened for Kashif. The notes spoke when words failed. New York in the late 1960 and early 1000, 970 was alive with rhythm. The city streets were buzzing with funk, soul, and gospel spilling out of churches and block parties. Even if Kashif didn't have a traditional family, the community of sound became his family. He would sneak time with instruments in school programs, practice until his fingers ached, and lose himself in melodies when the world outside felt unforgiving. That's when you could see the seeds of genius being planted. While other kids were chasing trends, Kashif was building a foundation, brick by brick, chord by chord. One thing people always said about him later was that he had this ability to blend pain with elegance. That came from those early years. He learned to channel the loneliness, the hurt, into sounds that felt bigger than him. It wasn't just about playing notes, it was about creating healing. He wanted to make music that reached people the way he wished someone had reached him as a child. By his teenage years, Kashif wasn't just playing, he was already composing, arranging, thinking like a producer before he even had the title. Imagine a kid with nothing, yet he's out here imagining strings, horns, harmonies, layering in his mind. That was Kashif, always seeing beyond his circumstances. The city gave him rhythm, the struggle gave him heart, and his gift gave him hope. That's how the boy who started with nothing but scars and melodies began shaping into the man whose music would eventually move the world. When Kashif hit his teenage years, the kid who once used music as an escape was suddenly standing face to face with opportunity. New York wasn't just a city, it was a living, breathing music factory, and Kashif was hungry to be a part of it. He wasn't the type to wait around for a lucky break either, he hustled. By the age of 15, this young kid from the Bronx had already joined a band that was about to explode on the national stage, BT Express. Now, if you don't know, BT Express was one of the hottest funk and disco groups of the 1970 era, cranking out jams that would fill roller rinks and clubs across America. Their sound was tight, funky, and guaranteed to get people moving. And here was Kashif, barely out of high school, suddenly riding that train. Man, can you imagine that? One day you're just a foster kid trying to survive. The next you're part of a group that's dropping platinum records like Do It, Till You're Satisfied. That song alone became an anthem, and Kashif was right there in the mix, playing keyboards and soaking up the whole experience. It was more than just fame, it was a masterclass in how the music industry really worked. The recording sessions, the touring, the endless rehearsals, it all became Kashif's training ground. Every show taught him timing. Every studio take taught him patience. Every mistake became a lesson. What made Kashif stand out, though, wasn't just that he could play. Plenty of kids could play an instrument. Kashif had an ear. He could hear arrangements in his head. He could break down why something hit hard on the dance floor and why something else fell flat. That's what separated him. And during his years with BT Express, he sharpened that ear like a blade. He studied producers, he asked questions, he watched how engineers twisted knobs, how vocalists layered harmonies, how grooves were built piece by piece. You know how some people just sit in class and take notes? Kashif was sitting in the school of funk and disco, taking mental notes every single day. Still, life in a group wasn't perfect. Even though BT Express was riding high in the mid-1970 era, Kashif sometimes felt like just another face in the crowd. The spotlight wasn't on him, it was on the hits, the vibe, the brand. For a young man with visions bigger than the stage he was standing on, that could feel limiting. He knew he had more to say musically, more to give than just being part of the machine. So while the crowds were dancing and the band was cashing checks, Kashif was already plotting his next move. That drive to break free wasn't about ego, it was about purpose. He saw music as more than entertainment. It was a vehicle, a language. He wanted to use it to connect, to heal, to innovate. And deep down, he knew he couldn't fully do that unless he stepped into the role of creator, not just performer. So after a few years, Kashif made the bold choice to leave BT Express. Man, that took guts. Most people would have clung to the safety of a successful band, but Kashif walked away, trusting that his vision was bigger than what he had already achieved. When he left, he didn't just vanish. He hit the ground running, investing more time into learning the craft of production. In the mid to late 1970, New York was buzzing with change, disco was morphing into new forms, R&B was evolving, and a young wave of musicians were experimenting with electronic instruments and synthesizers. Kashif, always ahead of the curve, gravitated toward keyboards and synths. He became obsessed with how to make sounds sparkle, how to build grooves that didn't just play in your ears but stuck in your soul. He was among the first in R&B to really embrace the synthesizer as a core instrument, blending it into arrangements that felt futuristic yet soulful. At the same time, Kashif was sharpening his songwriting. He wasn't just writing hooks, he was writing stories in melody. And because he came from pain, the songs had weight. They carried emotion under the groove, something listeners could feel even if they didn't know his personal story. That duality, funky but heartfelt, became his signature. By the late 1970s, Kashif had transformed from a teenage band member to a young man with a producer's mindset. He understood the grind of the industry, the politics of labels, the energy of live crowds, and the science of sound. He wasn't famous yet, not by name, but behind the scenes, he was building the toolkit that would soon make him one of the most important architects of modern R&B. And trust, his moment was coming. All it would take was the right artist, the right track, and Kashif would be the man everybody danced to even if they didn't know his name. When Kashif stepped away from BT Express, a lot of people probably thought he was crazy. Leaving a platinum-selling funk band? Man, most cats would have killed to hold that gig forever. But Kashif wasn't built for comfort zones, he was built for vision. And the gamble paid off. Because once he got into the producer's chair, his whole world shifted. That's when he started writing and producing songs that would literally shape the sound of R&B in the 1980 era. One of his first major breaks came when he linked up with a young singer named Evelyn, Champagne King. Evelyn already had the pipes, but Kashif gave her the polish. He wrote and produced I'm in Love in 1981, and just like that, the track shot up the charts. It was funky, it was modern, it had that fresh, synth-driven groove that Kashif was perfecting. That song didn't just give Evelyn a hit, it introduced Kashif's production style to the world. And then, in 1982, they struck gold again with Love Come Down. Man, let me tell you, that record still bangs to this day. You could drop it at a party right now, and the floor would light up. It's timeless. Kashif took Evelyn from a rising star to an R&B powerhouse, and in doing so, he stamped his sound on the entire decade. After that, doors started flying open. Kashif became the go-to guy for labels looking for that next-level R&B magic. And it wasn't just about grooves, he had a way of making singers shine. He knew how to shape a vocal, how to give space for emotion while still keeping the track moving. That skill led him to one of the biggest voices in history, Whitney Houston. In 1985, Whitney was just breaking out with her debut album, and Kashif was one of the architects behind her success. He produced You Give Good Love, her first big hit. That song announced Whitney to the world, and Kashif was right there in the liner notes. Can you imagine? Being the man who helped launch the greatest singer of her generation? That's not underrated. That's history. But Kashif didn't stop there. He had this knack for working across styles, blending funk, soul, pop, and even jazz. He teamed up with saxophonist Kenny G on the track Tribeca, proving he could cross into smooth jazz while still keeping it funky. He worked with Melba Moore on hits like Love's Comin' at Ya and Love Me Right, crafting tracks that highlighted her powerhouse voice. He even collaborated with Dionne Warwick on the duet Reservations for Two, a song that still gets love from fans of classic soul. Kashif wasn't boxed in, he was everywhere, shaping careers, elevating voices, and making the kind of records that stick in your head long after the radio stops spinning them. What made Kashif stand out wasn't just the hits, it was his innovation. He was one of the first R&B producers to fully embrace synthesizers, drum machines, and digital recording. But he didn't let technology strip the soul out of the music. Instead, he fused it. He'd lay down these slick synth bass lines, stack harmonies, then bring in live instruments for texture. That blend became his signature. It's why his records felt futuristic but still deeply human. It's also why so many younger producers, cats who would go on to dominate the 1990 and beyond, studied his style. By the mid-1980, Kashif was unstoppable. His own solo career was taking shape alongside his production work. Tracks like I Just Gotta Have Ya, Lover Turn Me On, showed that he wasn't just a behind-the-scenes genius, he could step up to the mic and deliver too. But even when he was shining as a solo artist, the magic of his career was in how many others he lifted up. For every hit he recorded, there were 2 or 3 more he produced for someone else, and each one carried that Kashif stamp smooth, sophisticated, and unforgettable. The crazy part? Even with all these accomplishments, Kashif's name wasn't on everybody's lips. You'd hear the songs, you'd know the voices, but Kashif stayed in the shadows. He didn't have the flashy persona of a Prince or the media machine of a Michael Jackson. He was cool with being the man behind the curtain, but that also meant history sometimes overlooked him. Still, ask any R&B head, any DJ spinning in the 1980 clubs, any artist who worked with him, they'll tell you, Kashif was the architect. He gave R&B its modern blueprint. Looking back, you can see this was his defining era. From Evelyn Champagne King to Whitney, from Kenny G to Dionne Warwick, Kashif wasn't just producing records, he was shaping culture. He was taking the sound of the streets, the emotion of his scars, and the future of technology, and blending it into something magical. And man, it was only the beginning. Because his real breakthrough, the moment where he stepped into his own spotlight as an artist, was right around the corner. By the mid-1980, Kashif was no longer just the guy behind the boards making other singers sound incredible. He was ready to prove he could step into the spotlight himself. And man, when he did, he showed the world that his artistry went beyond the studio. His solo career was about to put his name on the records he once made anonymously legendary. In 1983, Kashif dropped his self-titled debut album. For a guy who had spent so much of his life building others, this was his chance to carve out his own lane, and he didn't waste it. The album featured I Just Gotta Have Ya, Lover Turn Me On, a slick, synth-driven track that became an instant hit on R&B charts. It had everything that made Kashif's sound unique: those crisp keyboards, smooth bass lines, layered vocals, and just enough funk to make it irresistible. The song announced Kashif as not just a producer but a solo star in his own right. You could hear the confidence in his voice, the swagger in the arrangement. It was like he was finally saying, "Yeah, I built hits for everybody else, but don't forget I can do it too." And then came the follow-ups. Kashif had a way of delivering love songs that weren't just about romance but about atmosphere. Take The Mood, for example. That track became a cult classic among fans. It wasn't just a song, it was a vibe. The kind of record that made you want to dim the lights, pour a drink, and let the groove carry you. Even now, decades later, fans call it a banger. That's Kashif magic, timeless sound wrapped in sophistication. But the crown jewel of Kashif's solo era might be his duet with Melissa Morgan, Love Changes. Released in 1987, this song was pure fire. Their voices played off each other perfectly, Melissa's powerhouse delivery paired with Kashif's silky tone. Together, they created one of the greatest R&B duets of the decade. And the crazy part? The song itself was about the bittersweet reality of love evolving, of joy turning to heartbreak, and still, it felt uplifting. That's Kashif taking real emotions, layering them in melody, and making you feel every word. Fans loved it then, and they still love it now. Just check the comments on any old video people talk about Love Changes like it came out yesterday. As the 1,980 rolled on, Kashif's albums kept delivering. Tracks like Help Yourself to My Love, Stone Love, and Are You the Woman showcased his versatility. He wasn't afraid to experiment, blending synths with live instrumentation, moving between up-tempo jams and slow grooves. His music felt both futuristic and deeply rooted in soul. And while he never became the kind of household name that Prince or Lionel Richie were, in the R&B world, Kashif was respected. He was the producer's producer, the artist's artist. What set Kashif apart was that he didn't rely on gimmicks. No wild costumes, no outrageous headlines, just the music. That may have kept him from the superstardom of his peers, but it also made his legacy feel purer. People who loved Kashif loved him for the sound, for the craft, for the authenticity. And even though his chart success didn't always match the giants of the era, he carved out a lane that was undeniably his own. Let's not forget, Kashif wasn't just singing love songs. He was also innovating behind the scenes. His use of synthesizers and drum machines helped shape the direction of R&B. He was one of the first to truly master how to integrate those sounds into soulful music without losing the human touch, and that influence rippled across the industry. Producers and artists who came after him borrowed from that blueprint, some knowingly, others unknowingly, but the DNA was Kashif's. By the late 1980s, his solo career had given him respect and recognition, even if mainstream superstardom still felt just out of reach. He was nominated for Grammy Awards, toured, and earned praise from peers. And yet, the irony is that while his music was everywhere on the radio, in clubs, sampled by future artists, his name wasn't always front and center. People knew the songs, but too often they didn't know the man behind them. That's the definition of underrated. Still, Kashif's solo era proved something crucial. He could stand on his own 2 feet as an artist, not just a producer. Love Changes, The Mood, I Just Gotta Have Ya. These weren't just hits, they were statements. They said, I'm not just here to make stars, I am one. And for those who were paying attention, Kashif became a quiet icon, a man who built R&B's future while still carrying the scars of his past. He had climbed from foster homes and heartbreak to radio waves and Grammy nods. That's not just a career, that's a triumph. When you stack up Kashif's catalog next to the giants of his era, it's wild how often his name gets left out of the conversation. Think about it. Prince, Babyface, Quincy Jones, these are names everybody knows. They're celebrated as geniuses, icons who helped define the sound of the 1980. But here's the kicker, Kashif was right there, shaping the same landscape, dropping the same kind of timeless records. The only difference? He didn't get the spotlight. That's the tragedy of being underrated. You're essential to the story, but the world forgets to write your name in bold letters. Let's take Prince first. Prince was a once-in-a-lifetime performer, no doubt. He was flashy, flamboyant, a master showman who demanded attention. Kashif, on the other hand, was quieter. He let the music speak. Where Prince gave you the theatrics, Kashif gave you the polish, the clean, sophisticated grooves that slipped into your heart and stayed there. They both embraced synthesizers, both fused funk and soul into futuristic sounds. But while Prince was rocking arenas with purple lights, Kashif was in the studio building the backbone of R&B. Different lanes, but both vital. One just got a lot more credit. Now let's talk Babyface. By the late 1980 and into the 1990, Babyface became the go-to hitmaker. He wrote and produced for everyone, Toni Braxton, Boyz II Men, Whitney Houston, and earned the title of R&B's Golden Pen. But long before that, Kashif was already doing that work. He was writing for Evelyn, Champagne King, Whitney, Melba Moore, Dionne Warwick, and countless others. Fans even call him the Babyface of the '80s. And they're not wrong. Kashif helped establish that whole blueprint of the producer, songwriter who could both elevate others and shine as an artist himself. Yet when people list the greats, Kashif's name too often falls through the cracks. So why is that? Why does someone with a resume stacked as high as Kashif stay underrated? Part of it comes down to personality. Kashif wasn't chasing fame the way some of his peers did. He wasn't out here doing controversial interviews or creating headlines. He was a craftsman, a studio rat, more concerned with the sound than the spectacle. And in an industry that thrives on image as much as talent, sometimes being humble works against you. Another reason is timing. The 1980 were dominated by mega icons, Michael Jackson, Prince, Madonna, artists whose shadows were so big they eclipsed almost everyone else. Kashif was making hits, yes, but he was often making them for other people. And while his solo work was strong, it didn't get the same machine behind it as some of the bigger stars. Labels didn't push him to the front page, and without that kind of backing, even the best records can get overlooked by the masses. Then there's the issue of recognition. Let's be real. The music industry has a long history of sidelining black producers and songwriters, especially those who didn't play the political game. Kashif was outspoken later in life about the way artists were exploited, about how labels took more than they gave. That rubbed some powerful people the wrong way. And while he was trying to empower artists, the industry wasn't interested in handing him a bigger platform. It's not hard to imagine that his push for fairness kept him from being celebrated the way others were. Still, within the R&B community, Kashif's respect was undeniable. DJs, producers, and singers knew who he was. They knew his tracks. Love Come Down, You Give Good Love, Love Changes. These weren't just songs, they were cultural touchstones. And even if the mainstream didn't plaster his name everywhere, the people who mattered, the musicians, the fans who dug deeper, knew the truth. Kashif was a genius, period. What's crazy is how much his sound still echoes today. Modern R&B, neo-soul, even some pop and hip-hop owe a debt to the groundwork Kashif laid. The way he fused electronic instruments with soul, that's standard now. The way he elevated female vocalists and built lush arrangements around them, you can hear that lineage in every Beyoncé ballad, every Alicia Keys anthem. Kashif may not be shouted out in the same breath as Prince or Babyface, but his fingerprints are all over the music. So here's the big question. If Kashif was so vital, why don't we celebrate him the same way? Is it because he didn't play the fame game? Because the industry kept him quiet? Or because history only has room for a few names in bold print and everyone else gets pushed to the margins? That's the conversation fans are still having today. And honestly, it's why videos like this matter. Because when you line up the facts, Kashif wasn't just underrated, he was overlooked to the point of erasure. And that's crazy, man. The man who helped launch Whitney Houston, who gave Evelyn King her signature hit, who created one of the greatest duets of the '80s with Melissa Morgan, somehow doesn't get mentioned with the greats. That's a crime. But here's the beauty of legacy: it doesn't die when the charts move on. Kashif's music still speaks. Fans still spin his records, still argue his case in comment sections, still call him the genius he always was. And maybe he never cared about the fame anyway. Maybe for Kashif, it was always about the sound, about the healing, about giving people something to feel. If that's the measure, then Kashif wasn't just underrated. He was monumental. As much as Kashif's career looked like pure triumph from the outside, the truth behind the curtain was a lot heavier. Fame never erased the scars of his childhood, and in some ways, the music industry ended up cutting him all over again. This is the part of the story that hits hard, because for every chart-topping song, there was a battle Kashif had to fight behind closed doors. One of the biggest struggles he faced was loneliness. Man, it sounds strange when you think about a guy who was surrounded by fans, artists, and executives. But Kashif, deep down, often felt isolated. He grew up without a real family, bounced through homes where love was conditional or non-existent, and even when he built success, that hole never completely closed. People close to him said he was generous, kind, and spiritual, but also guarded. It's like he never wanted to let people too close, because life had taught him closeness could hurt. On top of that, the industry itself wasn't built to nurture someone like Kashif. The music game in the 1980 and 1990 was brutal, especially for black artists and producers who spoke their minds. Kashif wasn't just making hits, he was asking questions, challenging the way contracts worked, pointing out how labels took advantage of talent. And you know how that goes. When you shine a light on the dark corners of the business, the people hiding in those shadows don't like it. Slowly, Kashif started to feel the cold shoulder from an industry he had helped build. Then came the personal toll. Years of grinding, of studio nights, of the pressure to always deliver it wears you down. Kashif wasn't the type to drown his pain in drugs or scandal the way some others did. But that didn't mean he was free of struggle. He faced health issues later in life, and the stress of the business certainly didn't help. Friends said he sometimes carried himself with this weight, like he knew he had given so much, but hadn't gotten the recognition or financial security he deserved in return. By the 1990s, Kashif's name wasn't on the charts the way it had been in the 1980s. Music trends were shifting: new, jack swing, hip-hop, neo-soul, and while his influence was all over those sounds, the spotlight moved on. And that's the cruel thing about the business. One day you're the man, the next day you're yesterday's news. For someone as sensitive and thoughtful as Kashif, that lack of appreciation cut deep. Fans might have still been spinning "Love Changes," but the industry machine wasn't calling his phone like it used to. It wasn't just career struggles either. Personally, Kashif longed for the kind of stability he never had as a kid. He spoke openly in interviews about not having a mother's love, about how that kind of wound stays with you forever. Even as he tried to build his own sense of family through music, mentorship, and friendships, there were still nights where the silence was heavy. Some fans recall the news reports that he died alone in his apartment years later, and that detail broke their hearts because, in a way, it felt symbolic of how the world treated him. Brilliant but overlooked, surrounded by sound yet left in silence. Still, Kashif didn't fold. Even when the industry turned cold, even when the recognition wasn't there, he kept working, kept creating, kept dreaming. He believed in the power of music, in its ability to lift people up. And while the spotlight wasn't shining on him anymore, he refused to let it define his worth. That's the mark of a real artist: when the applause fades, the art keeps going. By the time the 2000s rolled around, Kashif wasn't dominating radio the way he once had, but he wasn't sitting still either. If anything, he shifted gears. He had spent decades giving the world music, and now he wanted to give knowledge. Kashif believed deeply in empowering artists, especially young ones who had no idea how ruthless the industry could be. He knew the contracts, the percentages, the tricks labels used to drain talent dry, and he didn't want the next generation to get played the way so many before them had. That's why he created his nonprofit, focusing on introducing teenagers to the music business. He developed a whole curriculum that broke down the realities: publishing rights, royalties, management, contracts. One fan even shared how Kashif personally emailed them the program, hoping to bring it to Florida schools. Man, imagine that. The same kid who had been bounced from foster home to foster home, now building a lifeline for the next generation. That's powerful. That's legacy. But Kashif wasn't stopping there. He was also working on something that, to this day, sparks conversation: his software project. The idea was to create a digital platform that would track royalties and contracts, basically putting power back in the hands of artists. If that sounds like a game changer, that's because it was. Some fans believe this was exactly why the industry didn't embrace him in his later years. They say he knew too much, that the software threatened the money flow of labels, and that's why his career momentum slowed. Conspiracy or not, the fact remains Kashif was ahead of his time. Today we see apps and platforms trying to do the same thing he envisioned decades ago. Still, the weight of being underappreciated took its toll. By the mid-2010, Kashif wasn't in the public eye much. He released a book about the music business, continued mentoring, and made appearances here and there, but the spotlight never fully came back. And in September 2016, news broke that hit fans like a gut punch. Kashif was gone, just 59 years old, found alone in his home in Los Angeles. That detail, that he died alone, still haunts people. Fans filled comment sections with heartbreak. So sad he died alone. He gave so much but left in silence. Some even believe there was foul play, pointing to his efforts to expose the industry and empower artists. Others accept it as a tragic end to a life already marked by struggle. Either way, the loss felt heavy. Not just because of who Kashif was, but because of what he still had to give. Looking back, his final years paint a complicated picture. On one hand, he was isolated, dealing with health issues, struggling for recognition. On the other, he was still innovating, still teaching, still dreaming of ways to help artists. He never stopped caring about the music, or the people making it. That's why, even though he passed in 2016, his story didn't end. Fans continue to discover his work, artists continue to sample his sound, and people keep talking about that software, that curriculum, those big ideas. Kashif's later years may not have been filled with awards or sold-out tours, but they carried something just as valuable: purpose. He lived with the scars of his past, but he refused to let them define him. He fought to create, to educate, and to protect others from the pain he knew too well. And in the end, even if he left this world quietly, his voice is still loud in the grooves of every record he touched. When you look back at Kashif's career, one thing is clear: his fingerprints are all over modern R&B. Even if his name doesn't always get shouted in the same breath as Prince, Quincy Jones, or Babyface, the sound of Kashif is everywhere. That's what makes his legacy so deep. He wasn't just an artist, he was a builder of other artists. Take Evelyn Champagne King. Before Kashif came along, she was talented, but when he handed her I'm in Love and Love Come Down, she became iconic. Those songs didn't just make her a star, they became permanent fixtures in R&B history. And then there's Whitney Houston. Man, imagine being the producer who gave Whitney her first big hit, You Give Good Love. That one record set her on the path to superstardom. Without Kashif, Whitney's debut might have sounded totally different. He also played a major role in helping Melba Moore reinvent herself in the 1980s. Tracks like Love's Comin' at Ya carried her voice into a new generation. And he didn't stop there. Dionne Warwick, Kenny G, George Benson, all of them worked with Kashif at some point. He had that magic touch, that ability to take an artist's gift and wrap it in arrangements that made them shine even brighter. But Kashif's influence wasn't just about hits, it was about sound. He was one of the pioneers who brought synthesizers into R&B in a way that didn't strip away the soul. He made electronic instruments feel warm, human, emotional. That balance shaped the direction of R&B through the 1980 and even into the 1990. Today, when you hear smooth grooves with layered synths and crisp drum programming, you're hearing Kashif's blueprint echoing. Younger producers studied him, sometimes without even knowing it. Artists like Babyface, Jimmy Jam, and Terry Lewis And later even Timbaland and Pharrell built on the foundation Kashif laid, combining electronic sounds with rich melodies, never losing the heart of the music. And when neo-soul artists in the 1990s came along like Maxwell and D'Angelo, you could still hear Kashif's influence in their lush arrangements and mood-driven tracks. For fans, his music remains more than just nostalgic. Songs like Love Changes, The Mood, and Help Yourself to My Love still get rotation. They've been sampled, covered, and rediscovered by younger generations who might not even know Kashif's story but feel his vibe instantly. That's the mark of timeless art, it doesn't fade. So when we talk about Kashif's legacy, it's not just about the hits he made or the careers he launched. It's about the sound he shaped, the doors he opened, and the way his music continues to inspire long after he's gone. Beyond the music charts and the studio credits, Kashif's legacy lives strongest in the way fans still talk about him. Scroll through comment sections today, and you'll see it people calling him a genius, a visionary, a man ahead of his time. Some call him the baby face of the '80s. Others say his sound defined an era even if his name didn't. That's the beauty and the heartbreak of Kashif's story. His work was everywhere, but too often his name was left in the shadows. When TV1 aired his episode of Unsung in 2016, it opened a lot of eyes. Many viewers had no idea just how many classic records he was behind. People who grew up dancing to Evelyn King or belting out Whitney's You Give Good Love suddenly realized, oh snap, Kashif did that. The episode sparked a wave of rediscovery. Fans started digging through his solo albums, talking about Love Changes with Melissa Morgan, remembering The Mood, and praising the sophistication of his sound. It felt like a small moment of justice, like the world was finally catching up to what die-hard R&B heads had always known. But what stands out most is the emotion in how people remember him. Fans often talk about his resilience, how he came from nothing, literally foster homes and abuse, and turned it into art that healed people. Others focus on the fact that he died alone, and they express sorrow that a man who gave so much love through music didn't have someone there in his final moments. That detail makes his story feel even more tragic, and yet it also fuels the determination of fans to keep his memory alive. His name pops up in tributes across social media, on playlists, in nostalgic radio segments. DJs still drop Love Come Down or Love Changes and watch the crowd light up. Younger artists sample his work, keeping his sound in circulation for new audiences. And among music historians, Kashif's role as a pioneer bringing synthesizers into R&B, mentoring younger artists, pushing for artist education, is finally being recognized as groundbreaking. Still, Kashif remains a symbol of what it means to be underrated. He did the work, he shaped the culture, he changed lives, but he didn't always get the flowers while he was here. That's why fans keep saying his name, keep telling his story. Because in remembering Kashif, they're not just honoring one man, they're honoring every artist who gave the world their soul and didn't get the spotlight they deserve. Man, when you put it all together, Kashif's story feels like one of the most powerful, heartbreaking, and inspiring journeys in R&B. Think about it from a foster kid who never knew the warmth of a family, to a teenager on stage with BT Express, to the mastermind behind some of the greatest R&B records of the 1980. That arc alone is wild. He went from silence and abuse to creating sounds that defined an entire generation. That's not just music, that's resilience turned into melody. Kashif's career gave us both sides of the coin. On one hand, he was the architect, the producer who launched stars like Evelyn Champagne King and Whitney Houston into the stratosphere. On the other hand, he was the artist in his own right, dropping tracks like I Just Gotta Have Ya, The Mood, and Love Changes that still light up playlists today. He was proof that you could stand in the background or the spotlight and still deliver greatness. He didn't need glitter or gimmicks. The sound was enough. And yet, that's where the tragedy cuts in. For all the hits he created, for all the lives he touched, Kashif never got the recognition he deserved. He was overshadowed by flashier names, pushed aside by an industry that didn't always want to empower artists, and left to struggle in silence during his later years. Fans mourn the fact that he died alone, a symbol of how the world so often forgets the very people who built the soundtrack to our lives. That's crazy, right? The man who gave love through music didn't always feel that love returned. But here's the part that can't be denied. Kashif's music is still here. His influence is still here. Every time you hear Love Come Down, every time Whitney's You Give Good Love plays, every time someone spins Love Changes at a party, Kashif's spirit is alive. His use of synthesizers, his lush arrangements, his ability to make music both futuristic and soulful, that's the DNA of modern R&B. His story might not have been told in full while he was alive, but it's being told now, and that matters. So what do we do with a legacy like this? Do we keep letting geniuses like Kashif slip through the cracks of history, or do we start saying their names louder, making sure the next generation knows exactly who built the sound they love? Should Kashif be remembered alongside Prince, Babyface, and Quincy Jones? Or is his greatness even bigger because he did so much with so little recognition? What Kashif teaches us is that talent and heart don't always guarantee fame, but they do guarantee impact. He may not have been celebrated the way he should have been, but the people who know. And maybe that's the beauty of underrated. It means his music belongs to the real fans, the ones who feel it in their bones, who keep it alive not because it's trending, but because it's timeless. At the end of the day, Kashif's story is about survival, creativity, and love. He didn't just make songs, he gave people healing. He gave them memories. He gave them joy. And that doesn't fade. So the next time Love Come Down hits your speakers, or Love Changes takes you back, remember the man behind it all. Remember Kashif. Underrated in name, but eternal in sound.